Lisa Jr. owns 10,000 shares of Unifier Limited. She enters into a 6-month forward contract to sell 3,500 shares at a forward price of $70 per share. So she is short this contract, meaning that she'll have to sell at this price at the forward maturity. The contract value at maturity from the buyer's perspective, so not Lisa's perspective, the other person on the other side of this trade, assuming the spot price at maturity is $10 per share, is closest to. So we're looking at this from the buyer perspective. We are long, meaning that we're going to be buying 3,500 shares at $70 per share at maturity, and then we're going to be able to sell at this $100 per share at maturity, since that's the new spot price. So we locked in the ability to buy at 70, and then we're going to be able to sell at 100. So we are obviously going to make a profit here. $30 per contract, multiply that by the 3,500 contracts, gives you a positive value of 105,000. Answer B. And that negative value would just be Lisa's position. So Lisa would have lost out on this contract. The 90-day futures price of a barrel of oil is 500 euros. At the end of the second trading day, the spot price of the barrel of oil is $5.25. Assuming that trading opens at the former day's closing spot and futures prices, and taking a risk-free rate of 4%, the contract's mark-to-market value on day 3 is closest to. All right, so let's pull in our calculation here. Essentially what we need to do is figure out the value of our future at the end of day 2. And we're going to do that by discounting this $500 futures price. We're discounting this back at the risk-free rate for 88 days of 365. And that's because this is a 90-day futures contract, and we want to know what our mark-to-market is 2 days into it. So we have 88 days left on the contract. That gives us a value of 495.29. And then to mark that to market, we're going to subtract that from the new spot price of 525, which gives us a value of 29.71 euros. Answer B. Which of the following best illustrates a scenario that leads to a fixed receiver having a positive mark-to-market value on the settlement day of a floating for fixed swap contract? The present value of the. So we're receiving fixed rate. And this mark-to-market value essentially is going to be a function of, are we receiving more value than we're paying out? So if we're receiving fixed rate, what we need to see here for our answer is that our fixed payments that we're getting need to be higher than the floating rate payments that we're paying out. If that's the case, then we'll have positive value. All right, so we've got the present value of the fixed payments to be received equals that of the floating payments to be paid. So this wouldn't give us a positive value. This would just be a value of essentially 0. We wouldn't have any value here because you're just paying out the same amount that you're getting back. B, fixed payments to be received is less than that of the floating rates payment to be paid. So if we're receiving less than we're paying out, that's going to be a negative for us. So this will have a negative mark-to-market value. So we should be going with answer C. Fixed payments to be received is greater than that of the floating rate payments to be paid. That's essentially what we said in the beginning. This ends up being a net positive for us because we're receiving more than we're paying. Answer C. A European call option on a non-dividend paying stock has 4 months to maturity. The exercise price of the option is $100 and the risk-free rate is 1.5%. If the current underlying price is 105 and the current call option price is 6.5, the time value of the call option is closest to. Let's pull in our option formula here to calculate the value. So our time value is going to be that call value, and then we're subtracting out, or not our call value, but our call price, so 6.5. So essentially what we're doing here is we need to figure out the intrinsic value of this option and then subtract that from this, and then what's left over essentially tells you what the time value is. So the value just by having some time to maturity. So, and it's going to be the max of 0 or our formula for figuring out the value of the call option, the intrinsic value of the call option. So if this was negative because the stock was out of the money, then this whole 6.5 would be time value. But we can see that we are in the money. So we're at 105 and the exercise price is 100. So that means we're in the money. So we will have a positive value. Okay, so we're going to take the underlying price, subtract out the strike price, which will be discounted back to the present. So we have 1.015, which is going to include that risk-free rate of 1.05. We have 4 months to maturity, which is going to be 0.33333, and that's essentially just 4 divided by 12 is what we would do to get that. So that gives us a value of 5.5, and because that's bigger than 0, that's what we'll subtract from 6.5. And so this is the intrinsic value, which means the leftover is $1, which will be our time value. Answer A. Consider a put option with a premium of $5 and a strike price of $20. The maximum possible loss for the writer of the put option is closest to $5, $15, or $20. So the downside of the stock is 0. So we have a $20 strike. So if the stock goes to 0, that's a $20 loss. So that's what this portion is here. So we can go from 20 down to 0. So that's going to be a minus $20 loss. However, we received a premium of $5 by writing this put option. So we wrote the put, received 5, and then the stock goes to 0. We still earn that $5, so that gets subtracted out from the 20 that we lost on the contract. Gives us a minus $15 downside. Answer B. Rose Associates is holding non-dividend stocks of Xerox Limited. The stock's current value is $100 USD, and in 1 year, the price can go up by 11% or down by 8%. The current risk-free rate is 3%, and the exercise price is USD 99. The risk-neutral probability of an up move and down move for a 1-year European call option on the stock is closest to. So there's some extra data in here that we're not going to use. So the price you can ignore and the current value we can ignore. The key things we're going to be looking at are the price we can go up, down, and the risk-free rate. So let's pull in the formula. Risk-neutral probability of an up move. Let me make this a little easier to see. So in our numerator, we're going to have 1 plus the risk-free rate. So 1.03 is what we'll have. You can see that right down here. And then we're going to subtract out the basically the magnitude of the down move. So we're going to be down by 8%. So you do 1 minus 8%, which gives you 0.92 for this value. And then we're dividing that by the magnitude of the up move, which would be 1.11 since we're going to go up 11%. And then we're subtracting out, again, that 1 minus the downside of 0.92. So when we work that through, we get the probability of an up move of 0.5789. So we've got 0.58 here for A. And then these are all just going to be the inverse of each other. So then you just do 1 minus that to get the down move. So that's also correct for A. We didn't have either of those answers for B or C. So we'll go with answer A. Why do issuers and investors tend to prefer interest rate swaps over individual forward rate agreements? Is it A, higher liquidity? Swaps do have higher liquidity than forward rate agreements, and that liquidity allows you to trade in and out better. And so I would lean towards going with A as our answer. That liquidity, again, it just allows you to trade more and make sure you're dynamically adjusting whatever exposure you're trying to have or hedge against. B, lower cost. They're not lower cost. And C, greater flexibility. Both of these are very flexible, so I wouldn't say that interest rate swaps are going to have more or less flexibility. So again, A, higher liquidity will be our best answer. Following sources of venture capital financing can be used to support a major marketing campaign of a company that has recently initiated commercial production and sales. We've got seed stage financing, later stage financing, and formative stage financing. So this one's going to be answer B. And mainly because seed stage and formative stage these are both going to be way earlier on in a company's life cycle. And so they're not likely going to be at commercial production and sales yet. They're probably still going to be more in the product development phase. Maybe they'll have a few clients or customers but they're not going to be doing major marketing initiation or campaigns yet. Answer B. An investor has a cash investment of $15,000 with a periodic rate of return of 7%. He borrowed an additional $5,000 at a periodic rate of 2% to increase his investment size. The leveraged rate of return for the period is closest to. So I think the easiest way to go about this is to figure out what our overall profit is, and then we'll take out our financing costs, and then we're going to compare that to our initial equity investment of $15,000. So we've got our profit right here, which is going to be that $20,000 total investment. That's our $15,000 plus the $5,000. This earns the whole rate of return of 7%. And then we're going to subtract out 20 to get our actual profit amount. And then from there, we're going to subtract out financing costs. So financing costs will be that $5,000 times 2% for the period. So that gives us a overall profit of $1,300. We're going to divide this into $15,000, which is our initial equity or investment that was our money. And that gives us a leveraged rate of return of 0.0867, which is going to round us closest to answer B. Which of the following is least likely correct regarding digital assets? So least likely meaning 2 of these will be correct statements and 1 will not, and that's what we need to pick for our answer. A digital asset. A, exist as data on a network. This won't be our answer because this is a correct statement. And this is basically the crux of what a digital asset is. It exists in the network. It's not necessarily a physical thing. B, cannot represent physical assets. I think I would lean towards this as our answer so far. If you look at things like tokenizing, this has been applied to real estate or other physical assets, and essentially it takes a physical asset and tokenizes it to bring it onto the blockchain or whatever network it's on, and it is a digital asset that's kind of backed by or represents a physical asset. And then C, may be characterized as a swap depending on its design, use, and function. This can be ruled out since that is also a potential use of digital assets. Answer B.